Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome back for another dispatch. Another week. Another week. It keeps on going. Okay, so I am continuing with Calvin Tomkins, the essay on Jasper Johns. Here we go. Jasper Johns' first solo exhibition at the Leo Castelli Gallery in 1958 established him as an artist of great originality and singular importance. Alfred Barr, the Museum of Modern Art's director, came in, stayed for an hour, and bought three paintings for the museum, a virtually unprecedented vote of confidence for a previously unknown painter who was still in his 20s. Johns and Robert Rauschenberg, who had an intense personal and professional relationship from 1954 to 1961, are often said to have broken the dominance of the abstract expressionist style and opened up new approaches and new subject matter. These included, in Johns's case, figurative paintings of targets, flags, numerals, and letters of the alphabet. John seductively painted renderings of these things the mind already knows. That's a quote. Things the mind already knows, as he put it. And Rauschenberg's wildly inventive collages and combines, part painting and part sculpture, which brought the whole promiscuous image bank of contemporary American experience into art making, set the stage for pop art, minimal art, and many subsequent developments. Although Rauschenberg's reputation has fluctuated widely, Johns's remained at an exalted level for 3 decades. As late as 1988, the Times critic Michael Brenson cited his standing in Europe as, quote, the greatest American artist since Jackson Pollock. The first stirrings of discontent surfaced over The Seasons, a suite of 4 large paintings done in 1985 and 1986. This is, yes, I get nervous that I'm not being recorded. The sound. In which autobiographical references and deliberate borrowings from Picasso made some critics suspect that the artist was losing his merciless originality. Critical dissent has slowly gathered momentum since then, fueled by Johns's increasing tendency to fill his paintings with cryptic, puzzle-like images and with details taken from pictures by other artists, from Matthias Grunewald's Eisenheim altarpiece to the forgotten W.E. Hills's 1915 drawing of a woman's head, which, depending on how you view it, can be either a pretty young Gibson girl or a forbidding hag in a headscarf. Right, I know the drawing. Didn't know that. It was W.E. Hills that did it. The complaints reached a fairly shrill pitch during his show at the Matthew Marks Gallery last year, when several former enthusiasts attacked what Michael Kimmelman in the Times called Johns's ever more preening and self-mythologizing brands of obscurity. Other critics had similar reactions. Peter Sheldall, in a review in The New Yorker, wrote that Johns had, in his new work, quote, attempted to retreat behind a curtain of hermetic, teasingly simple formats. The result is undernourished and overthought. End quote. When intelligent critics dismiss the current work of an artist who has been as extravagantly admired as Johns has, it is often because the work does not coincide with their expectations. For a while in the 1970s, the rap on Picasso was that he had done nothing major since Guernica in 1937. The recent John's criticism has been consistent and troubling, nevertheless. I have had my own feelings of frustration with what has sometimes seemed like Johns's willful oscillation between pulling me in and shutting me out. The large painted maps of the United States that he did in the 1960s, one in bravura abstract expressionist style and primary colors, another in subtly muted, mostly gray tones, struck me as the most beautiful works I had seen by a living artist. Until the Yusuyuki series of crosshatch paintings that he did 15 years later. The Japanese word usuyuki, which refers to a light snow, was an apt verbal equivalent to these works, whose exquisite colors seemed to lie just beneath the surface. The increasing complexity and the hidden references in his work of the 1980s and 90s never made me think that the artist was playing trivial games. But some of the paintings did seem clotted and hermetic. Over time, though, I have come to think that Johns is following the only course available to him. He believes in Duchamp's theory that the artist sets in motion a creative process that the spectators must complete, and the current disconnect may indeed turn out to be a failure on his part. My guess, though, is that the work will hold up and the criticism will not. Again and again in his career, he has thwarted critical expectations by abruptly changing the way he paints. The first major shift occurred immediately following his debut show at Leo Castelli's, abandoning the deadpan reticence and muted palette of his targets and numbers. He began painting splashy, colorful, mostly abstract canvases that carried echoes of Willem de Kooning's loose elbow style, canvases in which swatches of a bright primary color were identified, confusingly, by the stenciled name of another color. A very different sensibility marked the series of dark, somewhat morbid paintings and drawings he did in 1961 to 1963, soon after a bitter falling out with Rauschenberg. Their titles, No Liar, Fool's House, Painting Bitten by a Man, Diver, suggested to the multiplying herd of John's explicators that personal emotions had invaded the work of an artist whose previous approach had rigorously ruled them out. After the predominantly abstract flagstone and hatchmark paintings in the 1970s, recognizable images returned in 1979. Real knives and forks attached to the picture frame in some paintings, three-dimensional plaster casts of body parts in others, painted images of skulls and male and female genitals in the Tantric Detail series. We also began to see more and more direct borrowings from older artists, borrowings that took on, in Johns' cerebral reworking, a strange duality. When Picasso reworked Velázquez, Delacroix, and other old masters, he seemed to be devouring them, appropriating and digesting for his own use their mysterious essence. Johns's motive is more like compulsive curiosity. Why does this image carry meaning? And would it still do so if I used it in this way? Through all the stylistic variations in Johns's work over the decades, what didn't change was his painterly touch. In whatever medium he used, oil painting, caustic, a nearly extinct technique, which Johns rediscovered in an art book of mixing pigment with hot wax. Charcoal, pencil, crayon, watercolor, lithography, etching, and so forth. The physical skill he brought to its application carried an almost erotic charge. Looking closely helps. his friend John Cage, the composer, wrote in an early essay on Johns, though the paint is applied so sensually that there is the danger of falling in love. What are we doing? Should I pause? I mean, it does go on. Even his, one more paragraph. Even his detractors still pay perfunctory tribute to the way he handles paint. It's the subject matter that riles them. They want to know what exactly is the point of these bizarre and unrelated images in his work of the past 2 decades. The schematic floor plan of his grandfather's house in Allendale, South Carolina, the little stick figures wielding paintbrushes, the shadowy child with superimposed geometric forms, the spiral galaxy, the weirdly distorted female face from Picasso's straw hat with blue leaf. Aside from the skill involved, what do these images have to do with anything beyond Johns's all too private conceits and preoccupations? As Kimmelman wrote in 1991, his current drawings and paintings seem increasingly based on a code that demands to be broken, but to which he alone holds the key. But why should Johns be denied the use of unexplained imagery? The mysterious, unidentified shape near the center of Matisse's The Moroccans does not keep it from being considered one of the greatest pictures in the Museum of Modern Art. Impatient with all the critical spade work that has gone into decoding his images, Johns unveiled a new puzzle in a 1990 painting called Green Angel, a roughly rectangular shape that has appeared in several subsequent works. When asked about it, he said that he was not going to reveal the source. Baffled reviewers took to calling it a buffalo in a blanket. This might suggest that the artist is indeed playing games with his viewers, but to think that, you would have to believe in the kind of intentional working process that he has always made clear he does not follow. For Johns, as for most of the great modern artists, a picture is not a statement, nor does it emerge from a preconceived plan. Every brushstroke, even the first, is a response to something that has occurred before on the canvas or in the artist's mind or memory and will influence what happens next. Johns would like viewers to construct their own meanings from his pictures. With Green Angel, as he explained to me during another visit to his Connecticut studio, the idea was not to create a mystery about the derivation of an image, but to free the image from that other thing, its previous association. I was trying to find out something about how our minds and eyes work and what creates a new or original image. Now, a little bit more. I asked him what had triggered his use of autobiographical references in the seasons and later paintings. He was silent for some time, frowning slightly, enough to make me think he was irritated. "I don't know how to answer you," he said at length, "but I'll try. When you're painting, you have a central thought that pulls in various kinds of details, and that's the way you make the painting. You go in a direction and you gather up whatever you need to move that way. It's not necessarily that you have planned to make a picture like this. It's not, well, now let's say something about myself. You're saying, now let me make another painting." I reminded him of his early statements about not wanting his work to be about himself, his life, or his feelings. "Well," he replied, "one realizes that it's a failure, that effort. It produces something. It's an attitude which allows you to filter certain things and gives the work a direction or the sense of a direction. As other things are filtered or allowed in, you get a different kind of image. One would like to control that, but it is more or less a hopeless procedure. In other words, I suggested, the autobiographical elements were not important in themselves. They just happened to be what he was thinking, what he was working with at a certain point. That's what I think, he said. I'm going to read that again. In other words, I suggested, the autobiographical elements were not important in themselves. They just happened to be what he was working with at a certain point. That's what I think, he said. That's interesting. To work with one's stuff that way. Just using it for the sake of the image, really. So I'm in the middle of doing my some flowers. Yeah, in a time of tyranny. It's well, that's a larger topic, that whole question of tyranny. And it gets back to the whole left hemisphere, right hemisphere thing, for me anyway. Ian McGilchrist, the master and his emissary. All right, I'm not going to go into all that. It's time to move on. Keep painting. Take care. Bye bye.